You've probably felt it, that subtle ache in the chest after being overlooked. The sting when your words go unheard, when louder voices crowd the space and you, quiet, thoughtful, observant, fade into the background. Maybe you've wondered if the world only respects the bold, the extroverted, the attention-grabbing. And maybe you've tried once or twice to be more like them, louder, shinier, more performative, but it felt hollow, didn't it? Like a mask stretched over your true self. What if I told you that your quietness, your calm, your stillness isn't your weakness? It's your hidden magnetism, your silent strength, and in the noise of the modern world, it might be your greatest asset. The Stoics believed that true influence doesn't come from control over others, it comes from control over yourself, from mastery over your emotions, from knowing what truly matters and holding firm to it, especially when no one else is watching. Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor burdened with the weight of the world, wrote in his journal, not for others, but for himself, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." This wasn't a public speech. It was a private commitment to live with integrity, no matter the chaos around him. That's the kind of power we're talking about. Not loud, not needy, not desperate, but steady, grounded, quietly compelling. In this video, we're going to explore 11 habits, social, emotional, and psychological, that make a person silently attractive. Not in the superficial sense of being liked by everyone, but in the deeper sense of being respected, remembered, and trusted. We'll draw from ancient Stoic wisdom and modern psychological science to show you how inner strength radiates outward without you needing to prove yourself. You'll hear about people like Viktor Frankl, who endured the darkest chapters of human history and still chose meaning over despair. About Oprah Winfrey, who transformed personal trauma into global empathy. About Elon Musk, whose intensity is often quiet but rarely ignored. These individuals have something in common beyond fame. They've cultivated an unshakable presence that doesn't scream but resonates. You might be watching this because you feel invisible, or because you're tired of social games, or because something inside you knows that there's a calmer, wiser version of you waiting to emerge. This isn't about pretending to be someone else. It's about remembering who you are beneath the noise, beneath the roles you've had to play. You don't need louder words, you need clearer values. You don't need a spotlight, you need inner clarity. Silent attractiveness is not a tactic, it's a way of being. It's what happens when your inner life becomes so steady, so well tended, that others feel steadier in your presence. The Stoics called this ataraxia, an untroubled soul. Psychologists today might call it emotional regulation or self-differentiation, but the essence is the same. When you stop reacting to the world's chaos and start responding from your core, people notice. And more importantly, you begin to feel at peace with yourself. So let's begin. In the chapters ahead, we'll walk through the habits that transform you from someone easily swayed by circumstance to someone who moves through the world with quiet magnetism. This isn't about manipulation, it's about mastery, not over others, but over the only thing you can truly govern, your own mind. You're not here to impress, you're here to evolve. Ready? Part 1, the Unmoved Mover. Inner stillness as irresistible presence. You've walked into a room before and felt it. Someone wasn't talking, wasn't gesturing wildly, wasn't demanding the spotlight, and yet all eyes were subtly drawn to them. Their presence was calm but not weak. It was quiet but not invisible. There's something undeniably magnetic about a person who doesn't need to prove anything. They carry themselves like a mountain, rooted, unshaken, deeply still. You may think charisma is about being loud, outgoing, or funny, but the Stoics knew better. Real charisma begins with inner stillness. Marcus Aurelius, the most powerful man in the Roman Empire, ruled through war, plague, and betrayal. And yet in the solitude of his journal, he often reminded himself of one thing: be like the rocky headland on which the waves constantly break. It stands firm, and around it the seething waters are laid to rest. That's your first key to silent attraction, emotional stability so unshakable that people feel safer just being near you. When the world spins, you don't. When emotions rise, you stay grounded. That doesn't mean you suppress your feelings. It means you've trained yourself not to be ruled by them. Modern psychology backs this up. Emotional regulation, the ability to manage your internal state without being hijacked by fear, anger, or anxiety, is one of the most desirable traits in a partner, a leader, and a friend. According to Dr. Susan David of Harvard Medical School, people who develop emotional agility are not only more resilient, they're more respected. They don't overreact, they listen, they respond rather than explode. And in a world that runs on noise, your composure becomes your loudest statement. Look at someone like Nelson Mandela. Imprisoned for 27 years, subjected to inhumane conditions, and stripped of his freedom, he emerged not bitter but composed. Resolved, even regal, he was not a man who needed to shout. He had become a man who had conquered his own mind. That's what gave him authority. That's what drew even his enemies to the negotiating table. His strength wasn't in force, it was in restraint. You might not be leading a nation or negotiating peace, but the principle holds. In your daily life, when someone cuts you off in traffic, when your colleague talks over you in a meeting, when your partner triggers an old wound, you're given a choice. Will you react or will you return to your core? Will you let your ego run wild or will you anchor yourself in clarity? Stillness isn't passivity, it's power disciplined. It's the ability to pause long enough to choose a wiser path. It's in the way you pause before speaking, so your words carry more weight. In the way you breathe before responding, so your energy remains clean. In the way you sit with discomfort, knowing you don't need to fix, impress, or defend. And here's where the transformation begins. When you become someone who is not easily moved, you become someone others move toward. They sense something in you, something calm, mature, rare. They may not be able to name it, but they feel it. It's in your eyes, it's in your tone, it's in your silence. You become the eye of the storm. So how do you build this kind of stillness? The Stoics would say, practice it daily. Start with your breath. When emotions rise, return to the breath. It's the body's anchor. Then take time each morning to journal, not just what you plan to do, but how you plan to be. Prepare your mind like a warrior prepares his shield. And when the storm comes, as it always does, meet it not with panic, but with poise. Ask yourself, is this within my control? If not, let it pass through you like wind through a tree. If yes, act with courage, not with haste. You don't need to say much to be attractive. You need to be much, to know who you are beneath the roles and the noise. That kind of clarity is irresistible. You become a source of gravity in a scattered world. So the next time you enter a room, don't rush to fill it with words. Let your stillness speak. Let it be the calm that others didn't know they were craving, because true attractiveness doesn't broadcast itself, it simply abides. Part 2, the power of restraint, how self-control becomes silent authority. Imagine this, you're in a heated conversation. Someone's raising their voice, throwing verbal jabs, trying to get under your skin. Your instinct may be to fight back, to defend yourself, to match their intensity. But what if, instead, you said nothing? What if you met their chaos with calm, their provocation with poise, their volatility with silence? That moment where you resist the urge to react is where true power lies. Epictetus once warned, any person capable of angering you becomes your master, and in that single sentence, he reveals one of the greatest truths of silent magnetism. Restraint is power, not the kind of power that dominates others, but the kind that masters itself. The ability to choose your response, rather than being controlled by emotion or ego, is what sets you apart in a world addicted to reaction. Modern psychology calls this delayed gratification and impulse control, two of the strongest predictors of success, confidence, and likability. Dr. Walter Mischel's famous marshmallow test showed that children who could resist a small, immediate reward in favor of a larger one later went on to have better life outcomes. academically, professionally, emotionally. Adults are no different. When you can resist the impulse to lash out, to overshare, to overindulge, you signal maturity, depth, and security. Consider Viktor Frankl. A man imprisoned in Nazi concentration camps, stripped of everything, his freedom, his family, his dignity. Yet he discovered in that hellish environment what many never do in comfort, that between stimulus and response there is a space. And in that space lies our freedom. His restraint in the face of unspeakable suffering gave him not just survival, but meaning. He wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." That's the essence of Stoic wisdom. External events may be chaotic, unfair, cruel, but your response, that is yours to command. In everyday life, this plays out in countless subtle ways. When you're tempted to overshare on a first date out of insecurity, but instead choose to listen more than you speak. When you're criticized at work and your first instinct is defensiveness, but instead you ask, "Tell me more, how can I improve?" When you're in conflict with someone you care about and you resist the urge to be right, choosing instead to be kind. These acts of restraint build not only character, but quiet influence. You begin to radiate control without domination, confidence without arrogance. Think of someone like Barack Obama. You may or may not agree with his politics, but what made him deeply attractive to many was his temperament. He rarely reacted with visible anger or defensiveness, even under extreme scrutiny. He spoke with pauses, he didn't rush, his restraint gave his words more weight. His calm under pressure made people trust him, even when they disagreed. That's what silent authority looks like in the real world. And here's the paradox. When you stop trying to control how others perceive you, they begin to perceive you as more powerful. Because you're no longer performing, you're simply grounded. People can feel when you're not chasing validation, and that freedom from needing approval becomes deeply attractive. So how do you practice this kind of restraint in your life? Start by noticing your triggers. What causes you to react quickly? Anger, fear, insecurity. Build a moment of pause into those patterns, a breath, a question. Is this worth my peace? Train yourself to delay response, not forever, just long enough to choose it. In Stoicism, this is called prohairesis, the power to choose your attitude regardless of circumstance. That's your superpower. You don't need to prove your point to everyone. You don't need to share every thought or defend every action. Sometimes silence isn't avoidance, it's elevation. It's the ability to let noise pass, knowing that your worth doesn't need defending. And the more you master this, the more magnetic you become. People will wonder why they can't shake your presence, even when you've said so little. Remember, restraint doesn't mean weakness, it means wisdom. It means strength so steady that it doesn't have to flex. It means you've stopped being ruled by emotion and started being guided by principle. Because the most attractive people aren't the ones who win every argument. They're the ones who no longer need to. Part 3, the invisible crown. Self-respect without external validation. You may not realize it, but you wear a crown. Not the kind made of gold, but the kind forged in self-respect. The problem is, most people never learn to feel its weight. They wait for others to place it on their heads, to be praised, loved, promoted, or validated before they believe in their own worth. But that's not how the Stoics lived. And it's not how you'll become silently attractive. Seneca wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor." That craving he's talking about, more likes, more praise, more approval, is a form of poverty. The moment you need external validation to feel whole, you've surrendered your inner kingdom. But when you start living from a place of self-respect, when your sense of worth comes from who you are, not what others see, you become untouchable. And people are drawn to that kind of quiet confidence like moths to flame. In psychological terms, this is the difference between self-esteem and self-worth. Self-esteem can be unstable. It rises and falls with your latest success or failure. But self-worth is internal. It's not built on what you do, it's built on what you believe about yourself. When you start showing up in the world as someone who already respects themselves, you stop begging for crumbs of attention. You speak less, but what you say matters more. You no longer chase because you know what you deserve. Think of someone like Oprah Winfrey, raised in poverty, abused as a child, told she wasn't good enough for television. She could have spent her life trying to prove her worth to the world. Instead, she turned inward. She started reading philosophy, practicing stillness, healing her wounds. Over time, she stopped trying to be accepted and instead accepted herself. That shift from external to internal validation changed her energy completely. She became someone others wanted to listen to, not because she demanded attention, but because she embodied dignity. Her crown was invisible but unmistakable. You don't have to be a celebrity to live this way. Every day, you're given opportunities to choose self-respect over self-doubt. When you say no to a toxic friend who crosses your boundaries. When you walk away from a job that drains your soul. When you stop over-explaining your worth to people committed to misunderstanding you. These are not small acts. These are the building blocks of self-respect. And over time, they form an aura, a presence that tells the world, I know who I am. There's something magnetic about a person who doesn't flinch when they're misunderstood, who doesn't overcorrect when they're criticized, who doesn't shrink when they're not chosen. That kind of poise, that inner conviction can't be bought. It's earned quietly in private moments of truth. The Stoics called it eudaimonia, a state of flourishing that comes not from pleasure, but from living in alignment with your values. When you know your principles and you live by them, you glow differently. So how do you start embodying this invisible crown? Begin by identifying your non-negotiables. What values matter to you more than approval, honesty, kindness? Courage, write them down. Let them be your compass, not other people's opinions. Then practice self-affirmation, not the cheesy kind, but the grounded kind. I acted with integrity today. I respected my time. I spoke the truth even when it was hard. These reflections slowly rewrite your self-image. You're no longer the person who needs permission to feel valuable. You already are. There will be days when you forget your crown. When you want to be liked more than you want to be authentic. When rejection makes you doubt your worth, that's okay. You're human, but return again and again to the place within you that knows your value is not up for debate. And the more you live from that place, the less you'll need to prove anything. The paradox is this: when you stop needing others to validate you, they often start respecting you more, not because you manipulated them, but because you reminded them, subtly, silently, what self-respect looks like. Because nothing is more attractive than a person who's already chosen themselves. Part 4, the calm within chaos. Emotional control as silent magnetism. You've seen it before. Someone loses their temper in a meeting, storms off during an argument, spirals into anxiety over a single setback. In those moments, no matter how smart, skilled, or attractive they might be, something vital disappears: their presence. Their emotional instability overwhelms the room, and everyone else is forced to adjust. But then there's the other kind of person, the one who remains composed while others unravel, who listens instead of lashing out, who seems grounded even when the world shakes. That person draws others in without effort. Their calm becomes a form of gravity. That's emotional control, and it's one of the most silently attractive traits you can cultivate. Marcus Aurelius, writing during times of war and betrayal, reminded himself, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. This wasn't philosophy for armchair thinkers, it was survival. As emperor, he faced plagues, revolts, and constant political threats. But he knew that no matter what happened outside of him, what truly determined his peace and his power was his response. That's the essence of emotional control. You stop letting your emotions own you and start owning your emotions. Psychologists now understand this principle through the lens of emotional regulation. Neuroscience shows that the more often you let your fight or flight system take over, panic, rage, despair, the more reactive your brain becomes. But the reverse is also true. When you practice staying calm under pressure, you literally rewire your brain for resilience. You become someone others feel safer around. Not because you're emotionless, but because your emotions no longer control your behavior. Nelson Mandela is a powerful example of this. After 27 years in prison, he emerged not vengeful, but composed. He had every reason to be consumed by rage, to demand retribution, but instead he practiced forgiveness. He chose diplomacy over fury, and because of that choice, people listened. His calm became contagious. His emotional control allowed him to unite a fractured nation. That wasn't weakness, that was mastery. In your life, emotional control doesn't mean suppressing your feelings. It means creating space between the feeling and the action. It's the moment you notice your anger rise in traffic and choose to breathe instead of yell. It's when someone disrespects you and you respond with clarity rather than aggression. It's when anxiety knocks on the door and you ground yourself in the present instead of spiraling into imagined futures. These aren't dramatic gestures, but they build a quiet reputation that you are safe, stable, and self-possessed. And people are drawn to that. You'll find that when you master your emotions, people stop trying to test you. They sense your center. Your calm becomes a silent boundary. And here's what's remarkable: emotional control also enhances your physical presence. When your nervous system is regulated, your voice becomes steadier, your posture relaxes, your eye contact becomes stronger. You're not fidgeting, apologizing, or broadcasting insecurity. Your calm becomes visible and attractive. So how do you cultivate this kind of control? Start with awareness. Begin tracking your emotional triggers, what situations, people, or thoughts tend to unground you. Then introduce a pause, a breath. A grounding statement like, "This feeling is real, but it's not me." Train yourself to ride the wave of emotion without being swept away. Stoics practice something called premeditatio malorum, imagining worst-case scenarios, not to become pessimists, but to prepare their minds to stay calm. You can do the same, rehearse peace even in imagined chaos, and when emotions do spill over, because they will, treat yourself with compassion. Emotional control is not about perfection, it's about progress. You're not erasing your emotions. You're elevating them, you're turning storms into signals. When you do this consistently, you start to change not just how you feel, but how others feel around you. Your presence calms the room, your words carry more weight. Your silence speaks of depth, not absence, and people notice not with applause but with trust, because in a world addicted to drama, the calmest person always stands out. Part 5: The weight of your words. The power of speaking less but meaning more. Silence, when used wisely, can echo louder than a shout. In a world addicted to constant commentary, where everyone's broadcasting their breakfast, their opinions, their outrage, there's something startlingly magnetic about the person who doesn't speak unless they have something worth saying. You've felt it before. Someone walks into a room and says almost nothing, yet somehow everyone listens when they do speak. Their words land with precision. Their pauses carry gravity. That's not just charisma, it's a kind of discipline. A form of quiet strength, and it starts with understanding that not every thought deserves to become speech. Epictetus, who was born into slavery and rose to become one of the most respected Stoic teachers in Rome, once said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we can listen twice as much as we speak." That wasn't a joke, it was a strategy for living. For Epictetus, speech wasn't a right, it was a responsibility, and misusing it by gossiping, boasting, interrupting, or rambling was a sign of inner weakness, not strength. Modern psychology backs this up. People who talk excessively often do so to regulate insecurity or anxiety. It's a self-soothing mechanism, filling silence to avoid discomfort. But when you're grounded in your sense of worth, you no longer need to dominate the space. You can let silence stretch. You can observe. You can choose your words with care. And because of that, your communication becomes more potent. Consider someone like Keanu Reeves. He's not the loudest voice in the room. In fact, he's famously quiet, often pausing before answering questions, sometimes offering just a few words in interviews. And yet people lean in when he speaks. His mystique isn't manufactured, it's a byproduct of his restraint. He's not performing for attention, he's comfortable in stillness, and that stillness makes people pay attention. That's the paradox of silent attractiveness. The less you need to be noticed, the more people notice you. This principle applies whether you're in a meeting, on a date, or simply spending time with friends. When you speak only after truly listening, when you communicate with precision instead of clutter, when you resist the urge to fill every silence with noise, you signal maturity. You create a space where your words matter. And more importantly, where others feel heard, because being silently attractive isn't just about your presence, it's about how your presence makes others feel. One practical way to build this habit is by embracing the discipline of intentional speech. Before speaking, ask yourself, is this true? Is this necessary? Is this kind? This ancient filter, attributed to Socrates and echoed in Stoic circles, can transform the way you communicate. It shifts your focus from expression to impact. From reacting to responding, you can also practice what psychologists call active silence, choosing not to speak in moments when it's tempting. Let others vent without interrupting. Let ideas float in a meeting without immediately adding yours. Let discomfort hang, if only for a moment. That space you create isn't passive, it's powerful. It's in that space that people start to hear themselves. And in that space, your quiet presence begins to shine. There will be times when others mistake your silence for weakness. That's okay, let them. The Stoics were often misunderstood because they didn't react to every slight, didn't rush to correct every insult. Marcus Aurelius would write, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." In other words, let your stillness be your strength. Let your restraint be your magnetism. Eventually, those around you will begin to recognize the difference between noise and signal. And they'll come to trust that when you do speak, it's worth listening to, because your words carry weight, not because you shout them, but because you don't waste them. So don't be afraid of silence. Learn to wield it, speak less, mean more. And watch how your presence begins to speak for itself. Part 6, the grace of stillness. Posture, presence, and the unspoken message. There's something quietly magnetic about a person who moves with intention. They're not rushed, not fidgeting, not frantically scanning the room or checking their phone. They're just there, fully. You felt it before, the person who doesn't demand attention but receives it anyway. Their very presence feels grounded, composed, and quietly powerful. That's the grace of stillness. And while it may not involve words, it speaks volumes. Marcus Aurelius, in his Meditations, observed, "Nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." But here's the twist. When you live from that inner stillness, the outside world begins to feel your calm. Stillness isn't just a lack of motion, it's a quality of being. It shows in how you walk into a room, how you sit during a conversation, how you breathe when emotions rise. It's the physical manifestation of self-possession, and it's profoundly attractive. Modern psychology refers to this as embodied presence. It's not about looking confident, it's about being centered. Your body becomes a mirror of your inner state. Shallow breathing, twitching, restless gestures all signal anxiety or insecurity. But slow movements, relaxed shoulders, grounded eye contact, these signal confidence, even if you say nothing at all. Your nervous system speaks louder than your words, and people are wired to read that signal instantly. Viktor Frankl, the Austrian psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, wrote that between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space lies your power. That space is stillness. Frankl endured unspeakable trauma, yet maintained a remarkable sense of poise. He could not control his environment, but he could choose how he responded to it. That inner decision shaped how he moved, how he spoke, how he held himself. In the darkest chaos, his presence remained steady. That's the power of embodied calm. It holds even when the world falls apart. In your own life, you can begin cultivating this kind of stillness in small ways. Start with posture. Notice how you hold your body when you're anxious. Do you shrink, cross your arms, hunch your shoulders? Begin correcting these habits not by forcing artificial confidence, but by returning to a neutral, grounded state. Sit upright with your spine aligned. Plant your feet. Breathe through your nose. Speak from your chest, not your throat. These physical cues signal both to others and to yourself. I am here. I am settled. Another pathway is breath work. The Stoics practiced breath awareness as a form of meditation. Modern science now confirms that deep, diaphragmatic breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system, calming your mind and body. Before a stressful event, a date, a speech, a confrontation, pause and breathe deeply. Count 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out. Repeat. Your body becomes your anchor, and people can feel that. Think about how Barack Obama carried himself during times of political crisis. He wasn't loud, he didn't rush. He took long pauses, he moved slowly. He embodied the idea that stillness is not inaction, it's control. Even his detractors often admitted his calm was disarming. It projected authority without aggression. He didn't just have presence, he was presence. Stillness also extends to your face. A relaxed expression, a soft gaze, an unforced smile, these are subtle cues that you are not reacting, you are responding. When someone speaks, you're not just waiting to talk, you're listening, truly. That attention, that containment becomes irresistible. People feel seen, not scanned. They remember how safe they felt in your presence. But perhaps the most powerful stillness is the kind you hold under pressure. When someone provokes you and you don't bite. When chaos unfolds around you and you remain composed. That moment when others lose control and you hold your center is when your silent attractiveness shines most brightly. Not because you dominate the space, but because you contain it. So next time you walk into a room, don't rush. Don't fidget, don't perform, just arrive fully. Let your breath settle, let your gaze soften, let your shoulders relax, and then watch as the room responds, not to what you say, but to who you are. Because when your body speaks peace, the world lines in to listen. That is the grace of stillness, and it speaks louder than you think. Part 7, Anchored in Storms, Emotional Control as a Quiet Superpower. Any person capable of angering you becomes your master, Epictetus warned. And perhaps no phrase more clearly captures the silent gravitational pull of emotional control. Not repression, not cold detachment, but that quiet mastery of self, the ability to feel without being overwhelmed, to observe your own rising emotions without letting them hijack your actions. In a world where outrage is monetized and overreaction is the norm, your calm becomes your rebellion. Your composure becomes your allure. Think about it. When was the last time someone completely lost it, screamed in traffic, snapped in a meeting, dissolved into a rant over something small? In those moments, they didn't seem powerful. They seemed trapped slaves to their own emotions. Stoicism teaches the opposite, that true strength lies in restraint, not in reaction. To govern your emotional state is to become untouchable by external chaos. That doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you don't let fleeting emotions define your permanent character. Modern psychology has caught up to this ancient wisdom. Emotional regulation, especially through mindfulness, is now seen as one of the highest predictors of success in relationships, careers, and mental health. People with high emotional intelligence don't deny their feelings, they understand them, they name them, and they choose their response rather than being dragged along by their reactivity. You can cultivate this, and when you do, something remarkable happens. Others begin to sense that you are safe, steady, trustworthy, someone who doesn't escalate, someone who listens before reacting. Oprah Winfrey is a master of this principle. Throughout her career, she's faced racism, rejection, public scrutiny, and yet she's rarely lost her composure. When others pushed, she paused. When she was attacked, she didn't retaliate, she transcended. Her power isn't in volume. It's in containment. She doesn't dominate through force. She leads through calm. That's the kind of emotional control that creates silent magnetism. It draws people in, not because you impose yourself, but because you embody something they long for. Peace. So how do you build this in your daily life? Start by observing your triggers. Notice what makes your heart race, your voice rise, your jaw clench. Write it down. Keep a reaction journal. Begin to see the patterns, not to judge yourself, but to study your internal landscape. Then practice the Stoic pause. When you feel anger or anxiety rising, count to 10. Breathe. Ask yourself, is this within my control? If it isn't, let it pass like a storm cloud. If it is, respond only when you're calm. The point isn't to become emotionless. The point is to become emotionally sovereign. Another method is visualization, a classic Stoic technique called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of evils. Each morning, imagine small irritations you might face, delays, insults, challenges. Prepare your mind for them so when they come, they don't surprise you. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily. He wrote, when you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, today I shall meet with interference, ingratitude, insolence, disloyalty, ill will, and selfishness. Not because he was pessimistic, but because he wanted to remain unshaken when they arrived. You can do the same. Prepare not with fear, but with calm readiness. You'll notice that when you respond instead of react, people change around you. Arguments deflate, drama fades, others rise to your emotional level. You become the still eye in the hurricane, not because you resist emotion, but because you refuse to be ruled by it. So the next time you feel triggered, stop, breathe. Observe, own your emotional space before anyone else does. In that stillness, you'll find a power that doesn't need to shout, it simply is, and people will feel it. Because nothing is more silently attractive than someone who cannot be shaken, someone who carries peace into every room, even when the world is on fire. Part 8, the power of not needing, letting go of validation and becoming irresistible. There is something quietly magnetic about someone who doesn't need your approval. Not in a rebellious, I don't care what anyone thinks kind of way, but in a deeper, calmer sense. A person who knows their worth so completely that external validation is no longer their fuel. That kind of energy doesn't push or pull, it simply rests, and in doing so, draws others in. Stoicism teaches you to free yourself from the opinions of others because living for praise is just another kind of slavery. Epictetus said it plainly, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. That's not a call to apathy, it's a call to courage. To grow, you must stop trying to be universally liked. Because the need to be liked turns you into a shapeshifter, sacrificing your essence for applause. And paradoxically, that's exactly what repels respect. Modern psychology confirms this through the lens of self-determination theory. Humans thrive not when they are constantly validated, but when they feel autonomous, guided by intrinsic values, not external approval. When you stop seeking permission to be yourself, you become rooted. Your self-worth no longer rises and falls with praise or criticism. And that kind of stability, it's magnetic. Consider Elon Musk. Regardless of your opinion of him, one thing is undeniable. He doesn't tailor his identity to win popularity contests. He's polarizing, he's eccentric. At times, he's deeply criticized, but that doesn't stop him from pursuing what he believes in. He moves forward anchored by his own vision, not swayed by the public's momentary favor. And because of that, people follow even when they disagree. Why? because conviction is attractive, because not needing approval radiates strength. Now ask yourself how much of your energy goes into being liked, into crafting the right version of yourself for each room you enter, into reading micro-expressions to ensure you're not being rejected. It's exhausting. And it disconnects you from your core. The Stoics invite you to drop that weight, to realize that dignity comes not from applause, but from alignment between your values and your actions. What if your focus shifted from will they like me to am I living in accordance with my principles? That is the move from approval seeking to self-anchoring, and it changes everything. This shift isn't about arrogance, it's about detachment. It's understanding that being misunderstood doesn't diminish your worth. Seneca reminds us, a gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials. Being disliked at times is part of the polishing. It's a sign that you're not living on autopilot, that you're risking authenticity, that you're daring to be real. One practical way to train this mindset is through small acts of intentional nonconformity. Try going an entire day without checking your likes, your messages, your mirror. Wear something you like even if it's not trendy. Say no when your body says no, even if it disappoints someone. Practice letting go of the little tugs of people-pleasing. In time, you'll notice something strange. As your need for validation decreases, your presence becomes more solid, more grounded, more quietly compelling. Look to Nelson Mandela. He spent 27 years in prison, stripped of external affirmation, forced to confront his own identity in silence. And when he emerged, he was not bitter nor eager for revenge. He was steady, centered, whole. That inner wholeness made him a global force, not because he demanded attention, but because he didn't need it. And so, the world gave it. You don't have to disappear for decades to learn this. You just have to choose again and again to place your self-worth on what is internal and stable, not on what is external and fleeting. You'll find that when you no longer chase validation, you start attracting respect. Not the kind bought with charm or charisma, but the quiet respect reserved for those who stand rooted in who they are. And here's the paradox: when you stop needing to be attractive, you become far more so. Part 9, the quiet radiance of self-respect, holding your standards without a word. You teach people how to treat you, not with lectures or ultimatums, but with the silent standards you hold. Your boundaries, your choices, your presence. The way you show up in the world signals what you accept, what you value, and most importantly, what you believe about yourself. And nothing is more quietly attractive than someone who doesn't compromise their self-respect for attention, love, or belonging. Marcus Aurelius, a man who could have indulged in any excess as Emperor of Rome, chose instead a life of disciplined restraint. He wrote in his meditations, the approval of others, to be avoided. If you can avoid it, like everything else that tempts you off your path, he wasn't advocating aloofness. He was speaking to the power of alignment when your values and your actions match, not because others are watching, but because you are. Modern psychology calls this congruence. It's when your inner world matches your outer behavior. People can sense it immediately. You don't have to explain your standards, you embody them. You don't need to advertise your worth, you radiate it. And just as dogs can smell fear, humans can feel self-respect. It's not in your words, it's in your posture, your tone, your calm refusal to shrink or explain yourself unnecessarily. Look at someone like Michelle Obama. She doesn't demand respect, she commands it quietly. Her confidence doesn't shout, it doesn't posture, it simply is. Her dignity isn't built on popularity, it's grounded in clarity. She knows who she is, and she lives that truth consistently, with grace and unwavering integrity. That is the kind of presence that doesn't just impress, it inspires. Self-respect isn't about being rigid or unapproachable. It's about refusing to abandon yourself. It's choosing to walk away from what doesn't honor your values, even if it's tempting. It's knowing that being alone is better than being surrounded by those who treat you poorly. And yes, this will sometimes mean disappointment, rejection, conflict, but the momentary sting of setting a boundary is nothing compared to the slow erosion of your dignity when you don't. What does this look like in daily life? It's not grand or dramatic. It's leaving a conversation when it turns toxic. It's turning down an invitation that doesn't align with your goals. It's ending a relationship that costs you your peace. It's speaking up when your voice shakes and staying silent when your ego wants to win. These are not loud decisions, but they shape the kind of person you are, and others feel it. Seneca wrote, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself. Maintaining your standards in the face of pressure is one of those adversities. And it is through those tests that your character is refined. It's not about being perfect, it's about being consistent. Because every time you choose your values over your impulses, you strengthen the invisible structure of your self-respect. And that becomes your glow. This glow doesn't need validation. It doesn't demand loyalty. It doesn't chase admiration. It simply exists. And people feel it, even if they can't articulate why they're drawn to you. Because deep down, we're all yearning to be in the presence of someone who's rooted, someone who knows where they stand, and who doesn't waver when the world tugs at them. You become that person not by forcing others to see your worth, but by refusing to forget it yourself. Part 10, Still Waters Run Deep, the mystery of restraint and the allure of the unspoken. We live in a culture of oversharing. Opinions are broadcast like confetti. Vulnerability is sometimes paraded more than it's lived, and silence is often mistaken for absence. But in Stoicism, silence is not emptiness. It is depth, it is presence, it is power. The less you say, the more weight your words carry. The more you listen, the more attuned you become. The less you need to explain yourself, the more magnetic you grow, because the rarest energy in the modern world is not charisma, it's restraint. Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, once said, "We have 2 ears and 1 mouth so that we may listen twice as much as we speak." This wasn't just advice for politeness, it was a blueprint for wisdom. The person who doesn't rush to speak often holds the sharpest insight. The one who resists the urge to interrupt often understands most deeply. When you stop trying to be heard and instead learn to hear, you begin to feel the quiet rhythm of human behavior. And that awareness makes you undeniably attractive, because most people aren't truly seen or understood. When you become the rare person who sees without judging, listens without rushing, and speaks with clarity, people lean in. They want to be around that energy. There's also a psychological layer here. Silence creates space for projection. The less you reveal, the more people fill in the blanks, often with admiration. This isn't manipulation, it's mystery. And mystery, when grounded in authenticity, becomes irresistible. You don't have to perform. You don't have to decorate your identity with constant stories. You just have to be, and allow others to meet you in that stillness. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust and went on to revolutionize psychology with man's search for meaning, embodied this silent strength. In the face of unspeakable suffering, he chose not to lash out, not to dwell in hatred, but to reflect deeply. He came to see that the last of human freedoms is the ability to choose your response. That is the ultimate restraint. That is true power. He didn't need to argue, justify, or scream to the world that he mattered. He lived it. And because of that, his message continues to resonate across generations. In your own life, consider this. When was the last time you allowed silence to speak for you? When was the last time you sat in a conversation and simply let someone finish without steering it? When was the last time you chose to keep your dignity intact by not explaining yourself to someone who had already made up their mind? These are not small moments, they're micro acts of mastery. They're how you stop leaking your energy into every passing interaction and start containing your power. Practically speaking, you can cultivate this by creating pockets of intentional silence throughout your day. Turn off the noise, step away from the reflex to respond immediately. Don't post every thought. Let some emotions breathe before you express them. Not everything needs to be said. Not every opinion deserves airtime. As the Stoics knew, power lies not in having the last word, but in knowing you don't need it. You'll notice something beautiful begin to happen. People start listening more closely when you speak. They seek your presence even when you say little. You become the calm in their storm, not because you try to fix them, but because you're grounded in yourself. And in a world of surface noise, that depth becomes rare. And in its rarity, it becomes irresistible, because true attractiveness isn't about being seen, it's about being felt, and the deepest presence often needs no announcement. Part 11, the gentle strength of consistency. Becoming a lighthouse, not a firework. You've seen fireworks loud, dazzling, unforgettable for a few seconds, and then gone. Most people live like that. They burn bright when it's easy, when they're admired, when the mood strikes. But the truly attractive ones, they're like lighthouses, quiet, constant, unshaken by the storm. Their presence doesn't flicker with praise or fade in hardship. They just are, and that calm dependability, it draws people in like gravity. Stoicism teaches that your character should not be seasonal. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." He didn't mean be perfect, he meant be reliable. Be someone who acts by principle, not impulse. Be someone others can count on even when no one is watching. In a world that's constantly shifting, consistency is silent charisma. This doesn't mean being rigid, it means being anchored. You can grow, adapt, feel, all while staying true to your deepest values. Think of someone like Nelson Mandela. For 27 years, he was locked away. He had every reason to become bitter, to shift with the political winds, to abandon his integrity. But he didn't. He endured quietly. And when he emerged, he carried the same vision, the same poise, the same inner compass. That consistency made him magnetic, not because he sought the spotlight, but because he outlasted the storm without losing himself. Psychologically, consistency builds what modern researchers call trust capital. When people see that your behavior matches your values over time, they stop questioning your motives. They relax around you. They respect you even if they disagree with you, because reliability is rare and we are wired to seek it, especially in times of chaos. But consistency starts with how you treat yourself. If you constantly break promises to yourself, you'll silently leak confidence. You'll feel disjointed, uncertain. But when you follow through on your habits, your self-respect, your small disciplines, you begin to believe in your own strength. And others feel that belief radiating out from you. It's not loud, it's not flashy, but it's undeniable. Start small. Wake up when you said you would. Speak gently when you feel like snapping. Finish what you begin. Apologize when you're wrong every time. Praise people behind their back. Choose the harder right over the easier wrong. Not once, not twice, but over and over again, until that kind of integrity becomes your second skin. Seneca reminded us the greatest wealth is a poverty of desires. When you stop chasing temporary highs and instead live by stable values, you become abundant in something far more rare, self-respect. And in that quiet wealth you shine. You become someone others trust without needing reassurance. You become someone whose actions don't fluctuate with the mood of the room, and that steadiness, that is silently, profoundly attractive. It says to the world, I'm not here to impress, I'm here to be, so become the lighthouse. The quiet one standing tall through storms and sunshine alike, the one who doesn't need to shout because your life speaks loud enough. The unshakable calm within you. By now, you've seen that silent attractiveness isn't about playing games or pretending to be someone you're not. It's about returning to yourself. It's about shedding the noise, the performance, the craving for approval, and discovering the quiet force already inside you. A force rooted in Stoic wisdom. A force shaped by emotional regulation, quiet confidence, purpose-driven action, and the deep inner calm that cannot be taken from you. no matter what happens outside of you. The Stoics didn't live in soft times. They endured exile, war, betrayal, plague, and yet they found strength not in dominating others, but in mastering themselves. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Realize this and you will find strength. That same strength is within you, not to impress, not to manipulate, but to walk through life with dignity, clarity, and peace. So here is your invitation: don't chase attention, cultivate presence. Don't broadcast your worth, live it. Let your stillness speak louder than your words. Let your choices reflect your character. And when the world gets loud, when others scream, perform, or try to provoke, you'll respond with a calm that makes people wonder, what does that person know that I do? That's silent attractiveness, that's unshakable calm, and it's already inside you, waiting to be remembered. If this resonated with you, reflect on which part spoke to your current journey. Then choose one practice, just one, to carry into tomorrow. And if you're walking this path, you're not alone. We're building a quiet revolution here, one grounded in ancient wisdom and modern strength. If you found value here, consider subscribing to Unshakeable Calm. New videos drop regularly to help you live more deeply, think more clearly, and move through the world with quiet confidence. Stay grounded, stay steady, and above all, stay free.